Hi, Bill Lockridge with the Cylinder&Slide shop here. Thought you might like to have a short video on this project I've been working on for about 30 hours. It's a Colt double-action Lightning revolver. This was the very first double-action revolver that Colt manufactured, and it's in 38 long Colt. And because it is the first large caliber double action revolver, the parts in this are very fragile, because what they did was they took basically the design of a single action army, scaled it down, and made the parts to make it work. And so you have to remember that back in the day, 1877 for the first, they were inventing their double action large caliber revolver. Now they did make another one called a Thunderer, and I believe it was in 44 caliber. Don't know if it was 44 WCF, whatever. But anyway, the parts in this gun are pretty fragile. And after all these years, they are prone to breakage. This revolver, I don't know if I told you, it was made in 1902, but they, the best of my knowledge, didn't change a heck of a lot in them. They might have. I have no way of finding out or knowing. I guess I could do the research. But let me reset the camera and get it looking at the parts I've got laid out here on the bench, and I'll explain a few things to you. Okay, first of all, you've got the frame with the ejector rod, just like the single action Army, the loading gates, just like the single action Army. But the frame is, what, half size, roughly? And the cylinder and the center pin, which is the same as the single action Army, but in reduced size. But then we come into the special parts. They had to make a special trigger guard, and they made a bird's head grip here, which they brought out later, or earlier, excuse me, on the Bisley. So it does point well. So there was no fault in that design, but you got an extremely small area here to hold these parts. So the hammer has got the double action sear here that the trigger operates, the quarter, half, and full cock notches, and the hammer pin. And then here's the screws that hold the top of the back strap in and the bottom of the back strap. Then you have the mainspring and the mainspring screw. But now things get a little more complicated. Here's the screws for the trigger guard. So here's your trigger. And in this trigger, you have two flat springs. And one flat spring runs the hand and keeps it forward. And the other flat spring works on the strut, I believe. Anyway, now you've got the bolt or cylinder stop. And you'll see it's upside down. It doesn't operate out of here. It comes out of the breech face here. So the trigger has a stud on the other side that interacts with this extremely fragile little arm and pulls it out of the way, lets the cylinder rotate, drops it, and then it locks up in the cylinder and stop notches, which of course are on the back of the cylinder. And I can show you those. So now one of the more complicated springs is this double purpose or dual purpose spring. The little tine here powers the cylinder stop, and the larger tine here powers the sear. And this is a sear, single action sear. These, of course, are the pivot screws for the sear and the trigger. And then you've got a trigger return spring, which I had to make. I did buy this part from Gun Parts. They're pricey little jobs. I think they run a little over $100 for that part, and you have to completely fit it. And it's a casting, so you have to be very careful with it, especially on this little tab here that has to actually act like a flat spring, like that. Okay, and here's the broken trigger return spring, and here's what's left of the trigger or cylinder stop, and you can see that that little tail was broken off right here. And I could see evidence on the brake where it had actually been cracked for some time. So what I ended up having to do was fit this cylinder stop to the frame and then fit it so that it would operate properly off the stud on the trigger. And you can see this stud. Now this stud does two things. It not only operates a cylinder stop, it operates the sear. And when you pull the trigger for double action, it has to tip this sear completely away from the hammer notches so that when the hammer is released by this, and this is a double action strut that operates the hammer, that it won't crash on these and destroy it, because you can see they're very small and very thin. When you cock it single action, then the double action parts have nothing to do and they just glide. But this then engages the full cock notch and the hammer. And when you pull the trigger, it operates this arm right here and pulls the sear out of the way so the hammer can fall. Everything in this gun was hand fitted at the time, because back in the day, the parts they weren't able to make parts exact to tolerance and like we can today, so they made everything oversized so the fitters could fit the revolver. Now obviously they machined the frame, and this was everything then had to be fitted to the frame, to the trigger, to the hammer, the sear, and the bolt and the cylinder stop. So it's quite a lot of work. Gentleman I'm doing this for hadn't counted on all this, and I just decided that I was going to get it done, and I'll charge him a nominal fee. But I wouldn't even look at one of these for less than $200 to just see what's broken and what's not working, because this spring here is not made anymore. I can make the trigger return spring. The cylinder stop is available. I'm not sure if the sear is available. I'm sure it'll be a real winner to fit. And, you know, back in the day, the guys that were fitting these up, if they messed up a part, they could just grab another one and refit it. Now, after, you know, they built 15, 20 guns, I'm sure they got pretty good at it because they got a pattern established. So just thought maybe you might enjoy seeing what a very, very old double action Lightning Colt looks like.